All right, we're going to head over to the studio in the clouds where we've got Rhys Martin on the line with us. Route 66, Oklahoma Association, Route
Hi,
66. How you doing today, Rhys?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I appreciate that, and I apologize to anybody who might say route, and I apologize to anybody who might say route, because I do use them interchangeably, but I usually default to route, and I end up interviewing people who say route. And so, therefore, let's just get that out of the way. And Rhys, are you a route or a route man if we start off here?
Generally, route.
Okay.
I look to the song for that kind of inspiration, but just like the highway itself, it goes both ways.
I was talking to some people in Illinois yesterday, and they say route. And so I'm going, okay. And the song, that's where I got it from. Okay, we'll put that down. So, Rhys Martin, what is it you do, and how are you affiliated with Route 66 and the Oklahoma Association?
Well, I have served as the president of the Oklahoma Route 66 Association since 2019. I also sit on the board of the Route 66 Road Ahead Partnership, which is a national level nonprofit that brings organizations from all of the 8 states together to work on larger initiatives. And I also currently work as the Preserve Route 66 manager for the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
And what is that last thing, the historical trust preservation?
So the National Trust has been around since the middle of the 20th century. It is a national nonprofit dedicated to preservation. They're involved in a lot of different issues across the country, but since 2018, they've had a Preserve Route 66 program. One of the goals of which is to help get legislation passed federally to have Route 66 designated as a National Historic Trail, which is currently in legislature.
That's fantastic. So, I've written a book that's going to be released in April on Route 66, and I'm a big fan of a culture and Americana culture because I grew up in America. I'm sure if I grew up in Russia, I'd probably be a fan of Russian culture. Who knows? Get the little babushka dolls and that sort of thing. But I look at this, and right now we're on chapter 3 as we're kind of rolling out each chapter, leading up to the book, if you will. And chapter 3 is about how Route 66 changed hotels into motels, meaning that before Route 66 was in existence, people would go into downtowns and they would go into the city where they would stay and they would holiday and they would vacation. Route 66 came along, and all of a sudden, the whole structural foundation of hotels changed. They started coming in U shaped and they started becoming, you can drive right up and then get out in the morning for the salespeople. And that's just one example of how this one single road changed an entire country. We're going to get into the speed limits and Phillips 66 and some other things as well. But using that as an example, the motel hotel, how it changed America, do you have any examples like that you can think of off the top of your head, either through this nonprofit association or through Oklahoma or something, where you can say, wow, Route 66 really left a mark on our culture?
Boy, it's a very big question. And I mean, Route 66 came along at just the right time. I mean, the entire federal highway system that was established in 1926 was in response to the fact that more and more people were getting automobiles and needed safer and more reliable ways to travel. And in those early days, Route 66 was just one of hundreds of these highways that were given numbers. But to your point, pretty quickly, Route 66 started to separate itself out from its highway brethren. Whether it was serving as a lifeline for folks heading west during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, whether it was the troop buildup and movements during World War II, all of that actually helped influence the development of Route 66 and started to put it a little bit further ahead of the other roads because you had so many people using 66. And part of that is due to the fact that it had its own national association even then. In 1927, Cyrus Avery, who's known as the father of Route 66, helped establish the U.S. 66 Highway Association. And their entire goal was to encourage communities to pave the road as fast as possible because they knew the quicker they could get that road paved from Chicago to Los Angeles, the more people would use it. And so, I mean, I've read stories and seen numbers about how even during the Great Depression, commerce, motels, diners, that kind of thing on Route 66 actually increased because of the amount of travel that was happening on that specific highway when other areas weren't so lucky. So you can travel Route 66 today, 100 years after it got those double six numbers on the signs next to the roadway, and still see evidence of that tremendous growth, whether it is a motel like the Blue Swallow in Tucumcari or the Desert Hills here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm based. But you can also see the motels that didn't survive the interstate shifting out to the highway. But you're absolutely correct in that the coming of the automobile and the way travel changed in the early 20th century was very much influenced by Route 66 and the rise of the American highway.
I have never really had this romance with Route 66 until this year. And I've been traveling my whole life. Like for a while, I was a magazine publisher, and our clients were newspapers, and so we had 52 newspapers as clients across the United States. And so I literally traveled 42 weeks a year for 2 years, 34 weeks a year for 3 years, and then 26 weeks a year for another 2 years after that. So I was a Holiday Inn Diamond by February, a Diamond member, the Holiday Inn Express by February type of a thing, and then DoubleTree by June, and because not every you just stay at different places as you go. And this year, when the crude life, which I have the hat on, and well, never mind, it's blurred, but so the crude life is underwriting the book, and it's basically saying that the automobile is the reason Route 66 came about. And without the automobile, we wouldn't have this amazing culture like we do. We wouldn't have these hotels. We wouldn't have speed limits. We wouldn't have a lot of the safety uh, attributes that come into cars and et cetera. So for me, it was rather interesting. So we came out with the 66 facts about Route 66, and we kind of took it from a automobiles perspective, if you will, to help kind of tell that story because of the underwriting by the crude life. And so when I take a look at how this thing has really sprawled out, what I was so amazed with Route 66 is how initially it was supposed to be for like commerce distribution, trucks and semis and all these different things, but it was the families and the traveling salesmen and the individual that really flourished and benefited from this thing. So often do people complain about how the government creates all these issues for these unintended consequences that happen in the negative side? Well, this is one of the more positive things that I've ever seen in my life come about from one road to where here we are 100 years later talking about how this road has been significant in the history of the United States. Talk to me a little bit about that evolution, how the family, whether it's the family drives or the traveling salesman trying to get their middle class family fed and that sort of thing. That was the romance that really drew me to this road, was how Elvis used it, and the guy selling the mixo shaker mixer to the McDonald's and all these different things, man. It's really cool actually. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's this through line through 20th century culture in America. The very first nickname that Route 66 had, is the Main Street of America, because when they put it together and cobbled all these existing roads to create this highway, it was Main Street in most of the communities they came through, which, to your point, was good for commerce and for trucking. But it also took people into the business core of each of these communities. So you had people supporting the small business diners. You had other folks that would see all this traffic and say, well, I can make a buck by opening up a little roadside attraction. So they would do that. And, in fact, I mean, the entire interstate evolution that came later is because Route 66 had become so busy and so clogged with traffic, they needed a better way to travel and to handle the increasing amount of cars that was using 66 to go east or west. But you can go back and chart all of this and just see this kind of, they call it hockey stick development, where things just increased tremendously, especially after World War II, when the GIs come back from the war. Maybe they went out west to do some training, and it's like, man, I heard about the Grand Canyon or the Painted Desert. Now I want to take my family out there to see it, or I just fell in love with the landscape out in New Mexico. And so they would get in the car and head west, maybe go to Disneyland, and Route 66 was the best way to go. You can go back and look at all of the collateral that was created at the time and the pamphlets and everything else, and it says shortest, fastest, year-round best across the scenic West. You give yourself a good tagline, and then people tend to come your way.
Was it ever intended to go beyond Chicago?
Not that I know of. And part of that is because, between Chicago and the East Coast, you have a lot of gaps. But the Great Lakes, you can bring commerce in there from the ocean. So
Hmm.
Chicago at the time was the second largest city in the country. So it made perfect sense to say that's the hub we're going to use to connect out to the West Coast. And of course, the rest of the country developed in its own way. But starting in Chicago, going through St. Louis, and then heading out to Los Angeles was kind of the key to getting the road to be what it is today.
And back then, I suppose it was a little bit of manifest destiny too, because the east side, east of the Mississippi, was a lot more developed, whether it be roads or seaports or that sort of thing. I do remember when I was going to Saginaw, Michigan, and Muskegon, Michigan, from Fargo, North Dakota. We had to go via Chicago, and the only reason we wanted to go from Milwaukee to Michigan with the ferry, but it was closed at that time of the year. And that's where I thought what you mentioned about how the shipping can come in from the different ports and come in from the different areas. So that's why Chicago made sense, because I'm sure they had some roads that people could take to New York and Boston and et cetera, et cetera. I just wondered why it stopped in Chicago. That's all. I don't know if there was any reason why, but my guess is what you mentioned is that the arteries open up from there. And back then there wasn't any. There wasn't even highways and interstates. You know what I mean? So this was a huge road that really connected coast to coast. Paul Harvey said it best: "You can roller skate from one coast to the other," type thing. That was one of the best lines ever about how America has evolved with its transportation and its connectivity. You're in Tulsa. There's a big classic car convention or a parade or something that's going to be happening. I want to make sure that we plug and give some respect to as they go for the Guinness Book of World Record this May, I believe it is, May 30th or June 1st, right around there. I'll let you give those details in just a second. But are you guys doing any other events before we talk about the classic car that you could preview?
Sure. So you have a lot of different groups planning different things for the centennial. You're right that the city of Tulsa is planning a huge classic car cruise in on May 30th, and they want to break the Guinness World Record for the most classic cars through an intersection in a day, which is just under 3,000. So they want to hit the 3,000 car mark and get their name in the Guinness book. But you have a lot of other events happening. The national kickoff is happening on April 30th in Springfield, Missouri. That's the town famously where Route 66 got its number. There's a whole story as it was originally going to be 60, then they thought maybe 62, and eventually 66 was selected, and a telegram was sent to Washington, D.C. on April 30th, 1926. And that's why they call themselves the birthplace of Route 66. So that's the big national kickoff. Here in Oklahoma, our association is a pretty small little nonprofit, so we wanted to have a couple of events that we're organizing ourselves to bring some attention to some other communities. Like we have a big band hangar dance at the Stafford Air and Space Museum in Weatherford. We're doing a big centennial car show at the TP Drive-In in Sapulpa that we're going to pair with a screening of the movie Cars from Pixar, which had a huge impact on Route 66, especially the younger generations. We're working with the Round Barn in Arcadia for a music and craft festival. And there's all kinds of other events that are happening throughout the year. And with my national hat on, I'll be spending a lot of time on the road myself as I go here to there and help people ring in this tremendous occasion.
What's the cars analogy? I was a single parent, so I did have some cartoon movies in my past, but I'm not sure if my son was around that age, so I missed that one. What is Cars, and how is Route 66 involved with that? I've seen the movie jacket, but I know nothing about that movie.
Sure. So, this is actually its 20th anniversary. So it has a
Oh,
big year this year too. So, in the early 2000s, Pixar had some success with movies like Toy Story, and a lot of their folks were big car people, and they wanted a story that would use Route 66 as a storytelling mechanism to talk about the importance of slowing down and understanding your community and people coming together for a greater purpose. And so the gist of it is the story revolves around a race car that gets lost going from one race to another and finds himself in a town called Radiator Springs, which is cleverly a community that's made up of real life inspirations of real life people and places along Route 66. I mean, the mountain range behind the town is like tail fins of Cadillacs, like Cadillac Ranch in Amarillo. And throughout the course of the movie, he learns it's not just about being fast and being a race car, it's about helping your neighbor and it uses Route 66 to tell this story. Like the neon doesn't work anymore, the street's all messed up, the town's been bypassed by the interstate, and so it's legitimately, using the real life story of Route 66 and the development of the transportation in this country to tell this story about, how it's important we don't lose this connection with these towns, and that it's an important part of the American story of the last 100 years. So when that came out in 2006, estimates were that commercial traffic on the road from tourism increased 30%. And I love getting to go talk to, classrooms of college students or anybody, and I say, how many of you have seen cars? And every hand in the classroom goes up. And especially if you take a Route 66 trip and then watch the movie again, you'll realize, oh, this character is based on this person that owns a cafe in Stroud, Oklahoma, or this building is an actual gas station that exists in Shamrock, Texas, or, this, that, and the other. It's really incredible. So, Cars still continues, like most of Disney movies, to find new audiences every day. And of course, once kids have taken in the movie a time or two or several hundred times, then you can actually take them out on Route 66 and experience it for themselves.
I didn't realize that connection was there, but that is going to be very beneficial for Route 66 this summer to connect a lot of different generations. And it will be very positive, I believe. Is there anybody that you know that's doing a Cars showing during this whole extravaganza? I mean, really, Route 66 doesn't turn 100 until November 11th. So everybody's going to do, kind of the the pre-party. Everybody's going to have the pre-party, and then once the actual date comes, I haven't seen anybody who's actually doing anything once November 11th starts. I think there's a couple people that are maybe doing November 11th, but November 12th, I haven't seen anything. So it's just kind of like, I get it. It's the soft opening of the casino before it opens type of a thing. I get all that, but is there anybody doing a car showing that you know of?
Well, we are here in Oklahoma. The
Oh,
Centennial Car Show we have at the drive-in, the movie that night is going to be Cars. So that'll be really exciting. And I know other folks are talking about screening the movie throughout the year. It's a wonderful opportunity. And again, since it's celebrating 20 years this year, the hope is that, these screenings will be popping up all over the place for people that, maybe now have kids that weren't around when it came out in theaters the first time. Now they get to go have that wonderful cinematic experience and then hit the road.
oh, I think it'd be a fun drive-in, especially in today's day and age where you can just put a movie on the side of a building. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
project it right on the side of a building. We had a bank in North Dakota, Minnesota that would do that. Till about COVID, they did it for about 10 years. And then when COVID happened, like most things, people just kind of stopped doing what they were doing. But they were doing that like one Sunday a month or something like that during the summer months where they would invite people to come out, bring their cars, bring their blankets, watch this movie on the side of the building of a drive-in type feeling. And, it was a nice community family event. It wasn't meant to generate money. It wasn't meant to sell bank accounts. It was just meant to be a nice little picnic type of a thing. And those are important. Those are really important because people like to know that they can just show up somewhere, not be solicited, not have $100 invested in before they even park type of a thing. So the cars thing, I think, is a great way for communities just to, hey, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to show cars, come on by, and we'll kind of let it go from there. So there you go. And anybody, by the way, who's listening that is looking at supporting Route 66, you mentioned that you're a small nonprofit. I'd like to take this opportunity and give you a plug. And by that, you give yourself a plug. So, how can people donate to your cause? How can people find out more information? Because if there's ever a time to ask for donations, I would say 100 years old is the time.
That's right. So people can learn more about us and our mission at www.oklahomaroute66.com. We've got the normal social medias like Facebook and Instagram, so people can kind of see what we're up to. Right now, we're in the middle of a fundraising campaign to build a Will Rogers Highway marker in the town of Wellston, Oklahoma, which is the middle point of Oklahoma's Route 66 connections. If you leave the Kansas border and the Texas border at the same time, Wellston's where you'd meet in the middle. And another early nickname of Route 66 was the Will Rogers Highway, because Will was such an American icon of his time, and the highway kind of represented his journey from Oklahoma to Hollywood. And he was like the biggest pop culture figure of his time. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, that Will Rogers Highway nickname was resurrected and some granite markers were placed along Route 66 to tell some stories about the road's history and bring in, a nice witty Will Rogers quote to go with it. And we haven't had one of those markers built in a little over a decade, so we're really happy as one of our centennial projects to be building a new one.
Will Rogers. Now, is he from the area? Is he from Tulsa?
So he was born in Oologah, Oklahoma, which is just northeast of here. Famously, he said people couldn't spell or pronounce it, so he always said he was from Claremore. It's about
Okay.
45 minutes northeast of here.
And he's also known as Oklahoma's favorite son, if my memory serves me correctly. And I'm trying to remember his most successful movie or popular movie. Do you know that off the top of your head?
That's a great question. I'm not sure which one had the best box office. But I mean, he was in a ton of films, and he graduated from the vaudeville stage
Mm-hmm.
to the early days of radio to newspapers to film. I can't imagine what it would have been like if he'd still been around when television came about. He was just this kind of everyman with his wit, and he was able to talk about current events, political parties on both sides of the aisle, everything. And this was in an era when turning on your radio was literally inviting the voice of somebody into your home. He was such a major figure, both domestically and internationally. The Will Rogers Memorial Museum up in Claremore shows films of his all the time. I wish I knew which film was his highest grossing, and that gives me something to research when we're done here.
Well, that's okay because it was a pop quiz. I mean, that's the thing is that we don't really plan these interviews really ahead of time, and they're a little bit are organic to the some nature. And just to show you, I was going to say Pacific Palisades was the name of his movie, but that was where he ended up going and living. And Old Kentucky was the one I was thinking of. And you mentioned vaudeville. I thought that was the name of the movie, but then you're right. That was the actual genre that he graduated from. So this is important reasons why that you should donate to your cause to educate us on the. Well, that's the way we are nowadays. We everybody knows a little bit about a lot, and then we
Mhm.
rely on Google and AI to tell us the fill in the blanks in our mind type of a thing. And so I try to mental exercise myself from time to time. And so, but you are soliciting donations for the Will Rogers marker, if I heard you correctly. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, and if people want to be involved in longer term or just want to keep abreast of what's going on, we're membership based. So, $20 a year gets you an individual membership, and I send emails out usually once a week with what's going on Route 66. That helps us execute our events, help with preservation projects. We have a lot of initiatives going, and one of which we just recently launched is this little guy right behind me here. That's a flat wheel Rogers that families can take with them on their road trip and take pictures when they stop at landmarks and have an extra companion with them, which also serves to help introduce Will's story to another generation. So, our we preserve and promote the road in the state as well as work to educate folks on its importance and the fact that it's not a dead highway. A lot of people assume, oh, Route 66, it's a bunch of abandoned buildings and closed signs and main streets, and it's still very much alive and it continues to evolve today.
Is that the Will Rogers with the DX? Is that what that is?
Yep, that's him. That's our little flat wheel.
Okay.
I've
Now
got
is
one.
that separate from the DX or is that part of it? Okay, it is
Yep,
separate. Okay. All right.
talks a
Look at
little bit
that.
about the Will Rogers Highway and everything, and so he just makes a nice little photo op companion for folks that love Instagram and Facebook.
We might as well do one more pop culture reference in the world of Americana with Route 66 with the DX. Now, why does that look familiar to me? Because that's a defunct gas station now.
It is, yeah. DX stood for Diamond Extra, and it was part of Josh Cosden's oil company. I could sit here and talk to you for an hour about its history, but a lot of people these days associate it with the movie The Outsiders. S.E. Hinton wrote the book from high school here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and so when they went to film the movie in the 80s, Francis Ford Coppola came here and filmed on location. Some years ago, Danny Boy O'Connor, who became famous for uh, music and some other things, came to Tulsa, loved the Outsiders movie, and saw that the old house they used in the movie that like Patrick Swayze and Emilio Estevez and all those stars were in was still there, but it was kind of run down. So he bought it, turned it into a museum dedicated to the filming of The Outsiders and S.E. Hinton's history as an author. And so that DX brand is starting to kind of revive as this kind of nostalgia. So, but for me personally, the DX sign represents a friend of mine. Her name was Laurel Kane, and she used to have a Afton Packard Museum in Afton, Oklahoma, and it was in an old DX gas station that she restored. She passed away about 10 years ago, unfortunately, and so that is a nice way that I see that every day and remember my friend.
That is nice. And does the Outsiders have a Route 66 marketing with it? I guess I never associated the Outsiders with Route 66. It was more Ponyboy, I guess, than
Right.
Route 66.
Yeah, not directly, but several scenes were filmed on places right on Route 66, and the drive-in in there is the Admiral Twin Drive-in, which is still standing and is a Route 66 landmark.
Are there any other movies that we're leaving out that maybe are worth a mention that somebody might want to watch for maybe just the scene, like the scene. I know Elvis was very famous for making Route 66 famous, for example, because he liked touring along there. And so I'm not sure if an Elvis movie has anything in there, but some people might like to see the old shots from the outsiders to at least look at the buildings and see what's there and what's not there, and also just like the Cars movie, just to absorb some of the Americana culture that is involved with Route 66. But outside of the song by the it's who's I have to look it up in a second. Get your kicks on Route 66. I can't remember who wrote that off the top of my head. Do you
Bobby
know?
Troop wrote it, and Nat King Cole recorded the first version.
Thank you. And are there any other like a mainstream Americana movies or pop culture that you care to mention or people should know about?
Sure. Well, the big one, of course, is the Grapes of Wrath. That's where Route 66 got its most popular nickname, the Mother Road, the book by John Steinbeck, and then the film by John Ford. Easy Rider's a big one that you still see a lot of evidence across Route 66, especially out west with the motorcycle culture. So, like you mentioned, and then people still remember the TV show from the 60s, where you had a couple of guys in a Corvette driving around, kind of solving problems for people. Even though most of it wasn't filmed on Route 66, it kind of kept that romantic allure alive, and people said, well, I want to go out and take a road trip. So it still continues to show up, some in big ways and small ways. But those are the ones that people most often mention when I get the chance to meet with them.
Are there anything across Oklahoma that's worthy of mentioning that is happening throughout the summer, like the Tulsa Classic Car Extravaganza, and some of the other? Maybe I'm not sure exactly what cities exactly are along Route 66 in Oklahoma, but a lot of them are smaller. What people don't understand is that when the interstate system came, it truly impacted the highways. And in Minnesota, North Dakota, where I'm here, South Dakota, I'm right by the triangle of the. Instead of four corners, we got the triangle. We got the three states that connect, and I'm about an hour from the border of the things next to the Pelican River in -8 degrees temperature right now. So if you're wondering what my temperature is like, it's very cold outside. But when the interstate came in, we have Highway 75, for example, next to I-94 or I-29 and I-94, because Fargo's got a cross section, which makes them a great test market for a lot of different distribution, transportation type things. And Highway 75, when you go along there and look, every 20 miles there's another town. Well, that was by design back in the day. And then when the interstates came, man, those towns just stopped. They just stopped and they became small towns, like maybe 500 people, maybe if you're lucky, 1,000, and that's pretty rare. What's it like in Oklahoma with these towns that you go through Route 66? In Illinois, for example, you start in Chicago and it's pretty heavy, and then you get into rural America, barns and hay bales and one horse towns, and then all of a sudden St. Louis comes out of nowhere type of a thing. So what's it like in Oklahoma?
It's similar. I mean, you have the large cities, Oklahoma City and Tulsa, but all the little guys in between. And, out here, Route 66 and for most of its path followed the railroad, which came before it.
Mm.
And those railroads had to have water stops every so often, and you'd have towns pop up around that. And that kind of determined the cadence of these towns being developed. And of course, then the highway came and that changed things. Then the interstate came and that changed things even more. We're lucky here in Oklahoma that when the interstate started to come in the 1950s and 1960s, the Department of Transportation here was still obligated to have a free road. They were turnpikes here. So instead of paying a toll, they had to say, well, we got to keep a highway open for people that either can't or won't pay the toll. And they took Highway 66 and kept it under state jurisdiction, even though the federal jurisdiction moved. So Route 66 is still relatively intact in Oklahoma. In fact, you can enter from Kansas and exit into Texas heading west, and you don't have to turn in a single mile on the interstate. Most other states don't have that luxury. You've got areas where the interstate literally obliterated Old 66 when it came through. But you're right. These small towns, are vary in size, and a lot of them are agricultural. And Route 66 made a huge difference both when it came in and when it left.
Are you hearing from any of the smaller towns as they get ready for the 100 year? I imagine April is probably when most of the traffic is going to start flowing, April 15th, probably. And then May and June, it's really going to get busy, whether it be the whole stretch or maybe half the stretch or just the state. Like people in Oklahoma might just do the entire Oklahoma and that's it. Well, maybe Kansas, add another 13 miles type of a thing.
13.2. If you missed that point two, they'll talk to you about it.
Oh, they have. When I when I called the Kansas Route 66 Association, they were a very small nonprofit. The guy was working the lunch crowd, so he was trying to juggle two different jobs at one time. But he did correct me 3 times. 13.2. He
Yep.
did. Yes.
They're very passionate about their little section there.
He was half listening because he was trying to get his lunch orders through because he must have been working the cafe or something. But boy, he was listening enough to get me that 13.2. So just so the listeners know, yes, they're very sensitive to that. So and then are you guys doing anything nationally? Like, is there a national Route 66 at all involved here? A big celebration or anything along those lines? I think you mentioned Springfield, Missouri was kind of taking the lead on that, or were they chosen, or are they just the first one to raise their hand last, or how's that work?
So they were chosen. The Route 66
Okay.
Road Ahead Partnership has been working with the National U.S. Route 66 Centennial Commission to help organize things from a national level. Springfield, Missouri raised their hand, and it was just really wonderfully appropriate considering they were the birthplace of the highway to host that official national kickoff. But you have events happening all year, especially during the summer, both statewide, local, national level. One of the other events I'm helping organize is a national caravan in June that's going to start in Santa Monica on Saturday, 6/6. In fact, I'm actually wearing the shirt here. And we'll be pulling into Chicago 20 days later. And we're going to serve as this kind of national road trip parade that celebrates Route 66. So even if it's a little town that just doesn't have a whole lot of residents left, we're going to come through and we're going to give you a chance to make sure you feel connected to this linear village that stretches more than 2,000 miles from Lake Michigan to the Pacific Ocean. But people can go to route66centennial.org. That's the national event calendar website, and see what all's going on in the community closest to them.
And you're in Tulsa, and I've been to Tulsa a few times. I spoke at Tulsa for the natural gas convention at one time. Spent a week in Tulsa one night. Nice town. Is there any businesses on Route 66 that you care to mention that people might enjoy, whether it's a museum, whether it's a diner with a unique story, or whether it's one of these landmarks? You mentioned the upside down cars in the road in Texas that kind of stick out of the road. I'm in Minnesota where we've got giant turkeys and otters and birds and all kinds of things. So, our roadside landmarks are tourist traps, and I'm very, very well aware of summer travel and tourism and that sort of thing. So, whatever are some places that people might want to stop in Tulsa?
Well, speaking of Minnesota, we do have a Paul Bunyan lumberjack muffler man right here in Tulsa.
Oh, is that where the
Um,
Muffler Man is in Tulsa?
we've got several now in Oklahoma. That's been seeing quite a revitalized movement lately. But I mean, Oklahoma's full of great places. You've got, places like the Coleman Theater in Miami, which is up near Kansas, which is this beautifully restored 1929 theater that a guy built that made a ton of money in the zinc mining industry, and he was irritated the big acts weren't coming through his town, so he built this ornate theater to host them. And they still have their original pipe organ and everything. It's really wonderful. I mean, the blue
Hmm.
whale is here, which is one of the most photographed attractions on Route 66. That's in the town of Catoosa. Tulsa, of course, has, along with that Paul Bunyan, it has four other Mufflerman giants within about 3 or 4 blocks of it, and a big neon sign advertising Meadow Gold Milk that, is 30 by 30 feet, one of the biggest on all of Route 66. As you head west, you've got places like, downtown Sapulpa has a lot of historic integrity, lots of brick buildings, great walkability. So you can kind of get a feel for, what it was like back when it was, Model Ts and 1940s vehicles going down the street. But as you keep going west, Oklahoma is really where the landscape starts to open up, especially west of Oklahoma City. The Oklahoma Route 66 Museum is in Clinton, and that's really well respected. A lot of international travelers love that museum because it gives them the whole picture of Route 66. But it's tough to really call one thing out over another because it's we have an embarrassment of riches here, not to mention the other 7 states.
And I get it. Again, it's a pop quiz, and you're not necessarily the Chamber of Commerce, and so you're just naming things off the top of your head, and it's tough because you don't want to leave anybody out, but at the same time, you also want to take advantage of the opportunity that is in front of you to make sure people know about different places. We've got a stamp coming out, Route 66 stamp. I want to make sure people know about. If they want to go to the post office, they can support Route 66 through that way. And also, I was taking a look at some of the other things that were going on here. And when I was announcing this Route 66 Americana archive that we wanted to produce for all the counties involved, and just be part of the team in some kind of way, and then travel the route and really help document a lot of these different things. The Crude Life, as I mentioned, was the underwriter of the book, and so when we started previewing the book, it's amazing how many people came out of the woodwork that had affiliation with this route and highway, where either they drove it or they had families involved with it. I mentioned the gentleman who got selected for the stamp out of, I think he's out of Ohio, if my memory serves, even not even on the route, but he's out of Ohio.
I
Another,
know David Schwartz, and he's incredible. His work
you
is
do
great,
know
and
him,
he's on the
okay?
road all the time. Yeah, and I'm
Well,
so proud of
take a
him.
second to talk about him. I didn't want to put you on the spot because I didn't know if you knew him or even knew about the stamp or anything like that. So I again, pop quiz questions. I got to kind of tiptoe around. But if you can speak articulately on the stamp, please do.
Yeah, so David Schwartz has been involved in Route 66 for more than a decade. Kind of like myself when I first got started, he and I both came to the road originally as photographers. Just like, what is this all about? It's the Great American Road Trip. What's out here? And we just fell in love with the road, with the people that were its advocates and preservationists, and kind of joined this family. And David is just has an incredible body of work. And so when the post office announced they were doing a series of 8 stamps for the centennial to represent the 8 states of Route 66, and David was the photographer working with them for that. Like I couldn't have been more pleased. Like he's just a really incredible, warm person with a great body of work, and he's a member of the family. He's on Route 66 all the time. He had a photo exhibit here in Tulsa not that long ago, and so I think it's a really great example of how this road calls to different people for different reasons. Kind of like you were saying, maybe there's a family connection, maybe there's a business connection, maybe they saw it in a movie and they want to experience it, all that stuff. But once you're on the road, if you give yourself time to talk to the people that live and work here, you'll fall in love with a piece of it. And I can't tell you how many people I've met that said, yeah, I took a trip once and now I live here, because there was a piece of the road that felt like home.
And a few of the other things that I was going to mention was I had a gentleman that reached out to me, and he said his grandfather was the original photographer for Route 66 when they kicked it off back in 19 whenever that was. Oh, 100 years ago. I can do the math. 1926, I guess. 100 isn't that difficult to do math on in the moment. But yeah, he said he still has the negatives and the whole deal. And then another gentleman reached out to me, and he wrote a devotional for his congregation for every mile along
Mm.
Route 66. And I thought that was a great two different unique approaches to this entire storytelling Route 66. So when we did it, when we decided to do the drive, what direction do you go? What story do you tell? And all these. So we just decided to do county by county, which I don't think anybody's ever done before that I've seen, to where go spend a day in the county and document the county along the road instead of the road and that sort of thing. So it's been done, but we're just little different framework on how we're going to do it and this and that way the counties can really embrace their day or their 2 days. Like I think we're going to spend 3 days up in Joliet because of the distribution mecca that is up there. I mean, anybody who's ever been to Joliet outside of Chicago, it's where it is literally the distribution capital of the United States. There's more trucking centers there. There's more railroad. There's the shipping, getting ready for the shipping out of the Great Lakes and that sort of thing. So we have to spend a couple days there just because it makes sense. I mean, you can only get so many things done. But county by county, that's kind of how we're going. What's the most unique way that you've seen someone cover Route 66? We have a song, we've got a million different books, we've got websites, the Mother Road, we've got associations. I mentioned the pastoral devotional, which I had never heard of until this time. Are there any kind of highlighting archives out there that either you want to mention or you think that, hey, this was kind of cool how this guy, you mentioned the photographer that ended up doing the stamp. So I guess I kind of took that one away from you. But if you have any, please mention.
Gosh, you're right. I mean, there have been a lot of Route 66 media put together for different perspectives. It's hard to beat Michael Wallace's Route 66: The Mother Road, which was originally published in 1990. That's one of the books that's credited with helping kind of start that revitalization movement. There's a 100th anniversary edition coming out in May. And I recommend that to everybody. It's a great place to start. But one that's more recent is a book called A Sports Fan's Guide to Route 66. A
Interesting.
gentleman named Ron Clements took the road and talks about things like sports stadiums and, baseball teams and things like that kind of are along the corridor. That's a really interesting, different visual into the road. But a lot of them don't make it into like published media. I've met so many people that, it's a personal journey for them. That I met a monk that was walking Route 66 and talked to him about his journey. You have people doing different social media campaigns and things like that. Route 66 is kind of an open book that you can kind of plug into in a variety of different ways.
That is fantastic. And in fact, that's one of the reasons we're doing what we're trying to do what we're trying to do is because of those stories. Because that was the thing I noticed too was, I've worked in the media for, 30, 40 years. So I kind of understand how being accepted by a publisher and not being accepted by a publisher. And then all of a sudden the internet comes and people are like, well, I don't care if a publisher accepts my stuff. I'll just put it on the internet. And so I started noticing there was more personal journeys along the Route 66 documentation than, the books, because a lot of the books were repetitive. And you mentioned the sports one. That's great. I've never even heard of that one. I would imagine there's a hundred cookbooks or 100 diner type books, a diner's guide to Route 66, a statue on the side of the road guide to Route 66, and I imagine those are done to death. And because, they're popular and they're easy and that sort of thing. But you start getting into the different devotionals and you get into the monk walking and you get into all of a sudden the guy who's got the original negatives that might not make it into USA Today or Simon Schuster Publishing or some of these different things. So one of the things we're trying to get out the word of is that when we have our 3-hour interview blocks at some iconic diner, we want to invite anybody who's involved with it to come to the diner and have your story documented. It would be great if we could come to you, but we got to do this in the most efficient way.
Sure.
And so, we totally expect people will drive an hour, maybe half hour or whatever to a diner or something and tell their story for 15 minutes or so or something like that. And so that is our hope, is that each county will be able to identify who their local, leadership is or local storytellers are, and put the word out to them and see how that works, because there's so many stories to be told along this Route 66 that I think it's endless. I really think it's endless. I think that you could tell 100 stories a day, and you could probably do it for 100 years, and you wouldn't run out of them.
Yeah.
So, anyway, as we kind of wrap this up here, what are the key things that you want people to know, to write down and really remember as we get ready for Route 66, the 100th anniversary celebration, probably starting sometime in April is when the starter pistol will kick off.
Yeah, I mean, I just encourage people that, learn about it or curious about it, go travel it yourself. Don't worry about biting off the whole thing at once. If you've only got a weekend and you want to, it's more important to take your time to meet people, to have conversations with these amazing folks and these quirky individuals, because those are the connections that will mean the most when you get home. Route 66 has always been about connecting people, whether it's commerce or tourism or individual personalities, or communities literally with concrete when all they had was dirt pavement, dirt lanes originally. So, if people want to learn more about Oklahoma, I mentioned our website earlier, oklahomaroute66.com. We have a trip guide that we put together every year, which is a town by town guide of Route 66 in Oklahoma. That includes maps, things to see and do in each community. And especially if you're in the region, that's a great place to start. Oklahoma touts itself as having more drivable miles of Route 66 than any other. And again, that's partly because the highway existed beyond the interstate throughout from border to border here. And so there's a lot to see and do. But whatever you do, take your time, enjoy yourself. And as Michael Wallace, the author, says, life begins at the off ramp.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't give the Crude Life a question, since they are the underwriting sponsor of the early days here as we get these things up and running. Uh, Gas stations were created because of Route 66. A lot of people don't know that, is that we 66 miles an hour, Phillips 66. So the story, from what I understand about Phillips 66, is that they test drove a car on Route 66 at 65 miles an hour or 66 miles an hour. And it had to do with efficiency, it had to do with safety, it had to do with a lot of different regulations, that Phillips 66 used the speed limit and the highway and another 66 to get their name. And so Route 66 helped create Phillips 66, the brand. And that's interesting to me. And the whole idea that gas stations were basically created because of Route 66, in the same way hotels were, I mean, motels were. These are some really unique stories. Do you have any oil and gas stations? We mentioned the DX. Are there any other, oil and gas type stories that I might, as a Crude Life person, enjoy or don't miss? You mentioned the Muffler Man. I was already told I have to get pictures of the Muffler Man. I was already told I have to get the first Phillips 66 gas station in Kansas. There's a couple of markers that in order to get the underwriting, I had to promise that I was going to do, which it's fine. It's along the road. I could stop and take a picture and that sort of thing. But are there any any of those stories about gas stations or companies? You mentioned the DX and that sort of thing, but are there any other ones that are worthy of a mention?
Well, I mean, Tulsa was the oil capital of the world at one time. A lot of our beautiful Art Deco architecture downtown was built for like the Phillips family, the Phil Tower, the Phil Cave. You have a lot of that history right here in town. But all along Route 66, you have stations that have been adaptively reused. The Buck Adams Cosmic Curios here in Tulsa is an old Pimco gas station that's now a gift shop and that people stop and visit. But even just the evolution of the station, Odell, Illinois, has an old Standard Oil station, which is a very early example of that kind of cottage style. Back when, people that had houses nearby didn't want gas stations going next to them. These were dirty, like industrial buildings. And so you had companies like Standard and then Philips and these other companies that said, we need to make these fit in a little better to their neighborhoods. And so that's when you start seeing these cottage style buildings show up. So it's just also really fascinating to see how that has evolved. There's an old stone gas station near Arcadia, Oklahoma. The legend has it that there was a counterfeiting operation run out of there in like the 20s and 30s. Is that true? I don't know, but I like the legend. But all across Route 66, you'll find either stations that have been adapted or old stations that have kind of been left to the elements. And it really builds that story of the evolution of, fueling our vehicles for the past 100 years.
And one final question before I give you the opportunity to say whatever's on your mind as some closing thoughts and plugs and mentions that you need to mention is the hotels. The hotel industry's changed incredibly. The small business has changed incredibly. I would imagine that out of all the different businesses along Route 66, that the hotel industry's changed probably the most. Is there still some of the iconic hotels along Route 66? And I'm asking you to put your national hat on for a second beyond Oklahoma here. You start getting into New Mexico or even Oklahoma, you can drive a few hours before you see another town type of a thing. Maybe not so much, maybe it's an hour, but some of these small towns may not have a hotel still for whatever reason, or it might have a Holiday Inn that has it now, and maybe it's keeping the Route 66 vibe, or maybe it's just a Holiday Inn and that's it. Are there enough places to stay along Route 66, that are going to allow you to keep that vibe, or have the chains taken over? What is the hotel motel situation like on Route 66 now?
So I am very happy to report that there are many vintage motels on 66 that are still operating. They're still family owned, and they just relish the ability to serve folks not just from the US, but internationally that have chosen Route 66 as the lens they want to view this country through. You have places like, the small places like the Blue Swallow I mentioned in Tucumcari, New Mexico, which opened in the late 1930s and still operates like they always have. You also have other motels like the Railhaven in Springfield, Missouri, which is under the Best Western umbrella now, but it's a vintage motel that you still go and you still have that same experience, big gathering area out front for you to meet your fellow travelers and things like that. Just on Sunday night, I stayed at a motel in Stroud, Oklahoma called the Skyliner that just reopened after being purchased and fully renovated and returned to overnight service. It had been doing like some long-term renters for a while. So every community, whether you're out in California, you're in Arizona, I mean, Kingman, Arizona has an Airstream park that just opened on Route 66 where you can rent an overnight stay in a beautifully restored Airstream trailer. So you have all kinds of different opportunities to add that kind of unique experience, not just to the journey, but to the place you stay every night.
That's interesting. An Airstream rental. That's
That- It's
that
called
would
Tin
do
Can
well.
Alley.
I could see that doing very well, especially in a warmer climate. I mean, I've got a 25-foot pull behind camper. I call it a college apartment on wheels. It's like one of those when you open up it looks like a nice apartment when you walk in. It's got cupboards and a microwave and an oven and the whole deal. And then it's one of those where you open up the cupboards and everybody wakes up, type of a thing. It's and yeah, it's like a cheap apartment type of a thing, but a nice looking one. But at the same time, I was debating whether to bring the 25-foot pull behind camper or just do the roadside motel hotel type things. Um, so it's still kind of up in the air on that. So I'm glad to know that there are options. I did take a look at the route, and there's an abundance of RV parks, and there's an abundance of even some Walmarts. And uh, actually, I found a new thing called Harvest something or another.
Harvest Hosts.
Thank you. Can you
Yeah.
talk about the Harvest hosts a little bit? Because I knew nothing about these Harvest hosts, but when I started looking them up, what a great little service. Farms and breweries and apiaries and these, different small little boutique stores that allow you to stay 1 day or maybe 2 days when you're driving Route 66, with the idea that you're going to spend some money on their local produce and their local honey and their local wine and that sort of thing. I thought that's a fantastic service and just a great way to reach out to people. So yeah, talk to me a little bit about that if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Harvest Host is a national organization that partners with, let's say, non-traditional places for people to stay overnight in a trailer or camper, like museums, wineries, all kinds of places. And it not only provides a unique experience for the traveler, but gives the opportunity for some additional economic impact to those communities. Because, if someone asks, should I take an RV or should I stay in a motel? I'll say, look, if you're either way, I say stay in a motel because I'm all about preservation. And the only way these businesses and these motels will stay around and stay alive for the next 100 years is if people stay there, spend their money, and help support these small businesses. And Harvest Host is a nice way to take the RV traveler and not just basically put a dime in the meter at the next RV park, but you're supporting somebody that maybe they've gone out on a limb, maybe they've designed some kind of special experience for the RV traveler that you just can't replicate anywhere else. And at the end of the day, that's what brings people to Route 66 is they want to take a trip that is one of a kind.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad that we had this little impromptu conversation because I am trying to decide whether to bring this camper or just bring a car. Because if I do the camper, the way I'm planning it is that sometimes I might have to drive ahead and then drive back because I really do not like pulling a 25-foot camper. It's just not fun, especially for 2,200 miles or 2,400 miles or how many different things this is. I don't mind doing it on some smaller traffic roads, but man, you start getting into St. Louis and you start getting into Chicago and Albuquerque and some of these busier busier cities. I mean, I think Albuquerque takes you through downtown, doesn't it?
Sure does. Central Avenue cuts through the heart of the city. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're pulling a trailer, I would never recommend you go west from Kingman up to Oatman into the Black Mountains there. It's one of my favorite stretches of highway, but it's a switchback road through the mountains. I wouldn't tow anything through there, and you don't want to rob yourself of that really wonderful experience.
I think the word switchback just decided it for me right there. So, well, Rhys Martin, I appreciate the time today. And by the way, anybody out there who's got anything to do with Route 66, if you'd like to reach out and do one of these interviews, feel free to reach out and let us know. Route 66 Americana Archive is where we're archiving the different interviews and different stories that are sent to us. And I do like to give guests the final word. That way, the final thought is put in their narration and in their frame of mind, and they can mention anything that we forgot to mention or reinforce anything that they need to reinforce. So, Rhys Martin of Route 66 Oklahoma Association, the floor is yours, good sir.
Route 66 has been around for 100 years. Throughout that time, it has continually evolved in a landscape that where transportation has changed. And, Route 66 has had to reinvent itself. And that continues today. It's not a dead highway. It's not something that's just, a bunch of museum exhibits behind a velvet rope. You have new businesses opening. You have young people coming to Route 66. You have family members keeping alive these legacies that go back decades. And all of it is possible because people support this highway and it is a tourism corridor. Yes, these towns support Route 66 because it's Main Street through most of the communities it goes through, but they would not survive without people traveling and enjoying the experience. So get in the car, hit the road, take your time, and enjoy the journey.
And I just want to mention one more time that there is a classic car Guinness Book of World Record extravaganza being attempted May 30th in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And you are going to be there. That is my understanding that you're going to be along the side of the road waving. And are you throwing candy? How's that work?
Probably not throwing candy. Our
Okay.
office is right on Route 66 for the association here in Tulsa, but we will be there waving and cheering on the folks as they go by. And people can learn more about that at capitalofroute66.com.
And we will be there. We're planning on being there. In fact, our whole scheduled trip, we started with this date, May 30th, in Tulsa, and we worked backwards from there. So when you mentioned the Springfield, Missouri 100 year, I was trying to put in my head, okay, where are we going to be? And what is the date for the 100 year official celebration? It's May what?
April 30th.
Oh, April 30th. Okay, April. Is that the one with John Goodman?
It is, yeah, that they just announced that lineup.
They did, yes. John Goodman is going to be the MC or the special guest of honor. John Goodman, of course, from the greatest movie of all time, The Big Lebowski, at least in my world. I'm such a fan of that movie. As well as Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? He was in that as well. That is another one of my top movies as well. So just to give you a little bit of insight of my mind, where what type of humor I have. But we will be broadcasting there along the route, trying to count cars and see if we can't be the unofficial official counter of the Route 66 great extravaganza. And is this a common thing, by the way, the classic cars there? Is this an annual thing that they do, or is this they're just trying it?
This is a one-time deal. The last few years, we've had a really wonderful event at the fairgrounds that AAA's put together called Route 66 Road Fest, and that's going to
Oh,
be in late June. That's also happening. They have a big, like 400 car indoor car show, which is really wonderful. The Daryl Starbird car show is in February every year. That's coming up here in Tulsa. So we have a pretty strong classic car culture in Northeast Oklahoma, but nothing on the scale of this cruise.
and one last mention before we end this interview. I'd like to re-emphasize the marker for the Will Rogers strip of Route 66, where Rhys is collecting some donations for right now. And as I'm looking at the press release that we have here at Route 66 Americana Archive, parties who donate $750 or more can have their name or business inscribed on the back of the marker. The marker will be planned to be installed and unveiled on June 18th, 2026. And my guess is that they can contact you if they want to write you a check for $750. And if they want to write you a check for $5,000, you'd gladly accept that too, my guess is. Is that correct?
Happily, and all that money goes towards the building of that marker and our preservation work.
That's fantastic. So, folks, let's see if we can't get Route 66 some real good amplification and really help tell the story of what Route 66 means to America. Because again, from motels to gas stations, I don't think the average person quite knows what Route 66 has brought our country. But with people like Rhys Martin out there fighting the good fight, letting people know about it. I was educated on cars today. I had no idea about that. So hopefully we can all learn something new every day. And how can people get to you? How can people, first of all, get you in Oklahoma, and secondly, nationally?
Well, you can go to oklahomaroute66.com to find more about our organization. Our email is there, and if you go to our About Us page, my information is there also. And as you might imagine, I have a lot of plates spinning right now, but any of those doors lead to me, and I'm more than happy to help however I can.
Fantastic. And we'll have the links at Route 66 Americana Archive as well. Rhys Martin, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.